And we're back. With us, we have Kelly Fisk. Kelly will be our first presenter discussing the external communication stream. And her background is head of communications at Iress, an ASX-listed technology company providing software to financial service industries. Iress has more than 2,000 people based in the Asia-Pacific, North America, Africa, and Europe, supporting more than 9,000 businesses and 500,000 users globally. Prior to working at Iress, Kelly has held communications and marketing roles at Westpac, National Australia Bank. She's passionate about telling compelling stories and leveraging digital technologies to engage and inspire audiences. She'll be presenting on communicating change to external stakeholders. So Kelly, take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for that, Alex, and welcome everyone. It's really great to be here today. I hope you've enjoyed the session so far. I've tuned into a few and there's been some really great speakers. So hopefully I can keep the high quality up. So before we begin, yes, a little bit about me. Alex mentioned I work for Iress. If you're not from the financial services world, you may not have heard of us. We sort of sit in the background and support some of the biggest players in financial services, everyone from banks to financial advisors, superannuation funds, mortgage brokers. So we're all over the world, but we're headquartered here in Australia. So in my role, I'm responsible for internal communications and media relations globally. And I also lead marketing in APAC in South Africa. So what that means is I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to communicate with external stakeholders. So I think that puts me in a good spot to talk about today. All right, so what are we going to talk about? I'm going to talk a little bit about why change communications is more critical than ever. I think you've probably touched on some of this throughout the conference, but I think I would just want to capture that. A little bit about the psychology of change and what drives some of our audience's thinking when we think about change. A quick overview on how I like to think about strategy and process when I'm putting a communications change strategy together. And then finally, some do's and don'ts. Always love some do's and don'ts. Okay, so let's talk about change. First, I thought we just might go back, and this may have been touched on already. We're about to come up to the 1-year anniversary of when we all started to work from home and really transform the way that we live and work and operate as a society. And I think over the past year, we've seen the most amount of change in the shortest period of time, arguably, well, certainly in living memory, maybe in 100 years. And at times, those changes were really only told to us often hours before they were due to take effect. So we saw things like people having to load up their cars on New Year's Eve and hightail it over the border to make sure they got back home. We saw small businesses racking their brains trying to figure out how they were going to change their operating model overnight. And we saw parents like myself scrambling to think about how we were going to become a teacher by 9 a.m. I don't know about you, but I was not the greatest teacher. So I just want to reflect for a moment on an example with the Australian government. And I'm not going to get political here. I just think it's a bit of a teachable moment and a good before and after story around communicating change. So in the early stages of the cabinet, nearly a year ago now, Prime Minister Scott Morrison was holding these late night press conferences. And he would hold these immediately after National Cabinet when detail all of the changes that were going to take effect from the next day. Now, I don't know about you, but I watched these. I'd sit up to watch these and, you know, might have been a Monday night or a Tuesday night and I might have had a glass of wine in my hand, might have had my phone in my hand and doing a bit of doom scrolling and twittering and trying to figure out what all of this meant. Okay, so cafes were open, but schools were closed. Funerals could have 10 people, boot camps could have 20. Exercise was okay, but make sure you stay in your suburb, and singing and dancing were banned, gosh, maybe forever. So there was a lot to communicate. And I think the key error that Morrison made in those early days was rushing to communicate it. Now, there were some very good reasons for that. He and his team were trying to get out in front of this tsunami, this huge thing, which we didn't quite know what it all meant. But in their rush to communicate, they were coming out of a very long meeting where lots had been discussed, hammering out some sort of statement, and then just filing straight out to a very hungry media and a really worried public, and communicating this significant amount of change. He was tired, often a little bit sweaty from sitting in that conference room all day, and you could see the situation that the toll the situation had taken on him. The detail often hadn't been fully thought through. What was announced often conflicted with what other experts were saying, anyone from ABC's Norman Swan to other state chief medical officers. And so it was pretty easy for journalists to pick holes in the logic. And those of us sitting and watching on the couch were tweeting and texting and going, what is going on? So it was a bit of an example of how not to communicate change in many ways. And it didn't go unnoticed. At some point during the crisis, someone, I'm guessing it wasn't Catherine Murphy, but one of the Prime Minister's advisors said, do we have to do these like right now? Could we wait till tomorrow or maybe even the day after? And from that moment on, things felt much calmer and smoother and more logical. Everyone had had a good night's sleep. People had a chance to review all the materials and make sure that they were consistent and made sense. Internal teams were briefed, so when they were asked questions, they could back up what the Prime Minister was saying. And from that moment on, the noise really began to die down. The press conferences stopped for the most part being a form of extreme theatre sport, and they just became quite perfunctory and you know, oh, maybe I'll catch up with that when it's in the paper tomorrow, rather than having to see what it all meant. And I think that's a better example of how you manage change. So just want to touch for a moment on the psychology of change. And I've mentioned some thoughts there around psychology in terms of that anxiousness that we were feeling as a society during those early stages. So some of you might be familiar with this. This is the 5 stages of grief as outlined by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 1969. And she put this together, or did this research, to talk about the internal emotional journey that individuals go through when they deal with death, either their own death or the death of a loved one. Now, it's a pretty powerful tool and it still exists today, and also something that sort of exists in pop culture. But pretty soon business leaders realized that's a good model for communicating change of any kind. And so they adapted this into something called the change curve. And as you can see, at each stage of the change, your communications or support approach needs to sort of mirror the emotional journey of your stakeholders and drive them towards the next phase, and then the ultimate phase of either acceptance or integration of that change. But I think that while this is still really powerful, what this last year has taught me is that it just doesn't factor in enough the impact of anxiety on thinking about how people think and respond to change. So here's an example of anxiety. Does everyone remember this moment of the pandemic? Yeah, hopefully you're not in this picture. If you are, I'm not having a go. It was a crazy time. It was really strange, right? A really strange moment in our history. And it's also something we've seen pop up again when we've had outbreaks in places like Brisbane and Perth, who had been fairly immune to some of the stuff going on the East Coast until then. So why did seemingly rational human beings decide en masse that the one item they needed to hoard in this unforeseen set of circumstances wasn't food or water or any other emergency supply, but toilet paper? So researchers have kind of thought about this phenomenon, and this is part of what they think is driving the toilet paper effect, if you want to call it that. Pretty stark, right? So toilet paper is a large, bulky item, and when people bought it up, it left a big, stark, noticeable hole on the shelves. And this triggered a neurological response. So as human beings, we have all depended on fear and anxiety to survive. The reason that all of us are here today is because our ancestors were a little bit more fearful and anxious than maybe the guy or the girl in the cave over there. And that fear and anxiety served to protect us from a pterodactyl, maybe not pterodactyl, but a saber-toothed tiger or some other threat. But evolution is a really slow process. And so while we don't thankfully face imminent death every day, our brain is still very much hardwired for fight or flight. So when we're triggered by something like that empty supermarket shelf, the amygdala, which is highlighted there, which is the emotional center of our brain, it sounds an alarm. and releases this raft of powerful neurochemicals into our body, stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. And this prepares us for that fight or flight response. So what you might notice when you've had an amygdala response is your heart rate will increase, palms get a bit sweaty, might start rapid or shallow breathing. But worse than this, the amygdala response actually shuts down the neural pathway to the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational thinking part of your brain. So if you've ever found yourself in a confrontation with maybe your partner or a friend or a family member or a coworker even, then you'll know what this feels like. It's in this moment that you say all those things that you later regret because you weren't thinking clearly, you were triggered. So why is all of this important when we think about communicating change? Well, I think it's for two reasons. One, we all need to be aware that the past year has left a lot of people feeling very raw and very vulnerable. And things that could have maybe been quite a minor change in the past could actually be the final straw for some people. So I'm not saying that you need to wrap your stakeholders up in cotton wool or anything like that, but I do think that our words and our actions have impact, and we need to tread carefully and recognize that we've all kind of been through something that resembles almost a collective trauma. And secondly, I think when you're devising your communications change strategy, you need to counter the threat of the amygdala response, that fight or flight response. And you do that by being clear and calm and rational. So your audience might take a bit of time to get there. They might be working their way through that change curve. But if you can remain patient and calm and clear, you will be helping them to navigate that journey. Okay, so enough about background. Let's get into some of the principles of how you put all of this together. First thing, it's obviously really important, is who we're talking to. So if I think about this, if I'm putting a comms change strategy together, these are some of the stakeholders that I might be talking to. So quite a big group there. They're all very different. They all have quite different perspectives on Iress and different needs from us. But interestingly, when you think about a change, generally, a certain amount of that core information is going to be the same. There might be some tailoring around the edges, but the core message can often be quite broadly the same. It's all about how you tailor the information and how you phase it. So I'll get to that in a moment. Next, jumping ahead there. Next, we're going to think about how we're going to reach these audiences. So at Iress, these are some of the channels that I would use if I'm reaching out to external or internal stakeholders and communicating change. So yours could be very different depending on the industry you're in. You might need to send real, snail mail. You might need to take out a full page advertisement in a newspaper, run a town hall, bang on people's doors even. Depending on the size and the impact and the timing of the change, you might need to throw absolutely everything at it. If it's something that's happening soon and it's big, you might need to do it all at once. But looking at that channel mix, it's really important to evaluate the pros and cons of each. So at Iress, we rely quite heavily on email to communicate with our clients. And we do have a pretty good open rate, probably a higher than industry average open rate. We're quite an engaged client base, but it's still not anywhere near 100%. And that's why it's critical that email is backed up with messages on our website, social media, our Iress community forum, and especially our people. It's also really important to consider message fatigue. So as communications managers, we should, if we don't have an understanding of the communications going out to our stakeholders, we need to get that understanding. And often when you see it, it's a lot. So if you're communicating a big and complex and important change, you might need to dial down some of the BAU stuff that's going on, because your customers or members or clients, they might not be interested in a chatty, casual sort of newsletter or being invited to participate in an NPS survey, for example, if they're navigating their way through this change. They might need some time. They might need a bit of space. So consider that carefully. And finally, I think you have to consider that you've got the right tone for the message. The right, don't get that mismatch of tone and approach. So an email or a letter is probably a really good place to get all the facts out, but I wouldn't do that on LinkedIn. A community forum can let you point to areas of help and support and put a face to some of this. A throwaway line at the end of a really long newsletter, not a good place to communicate a big change that's coming. If you're going to involve your leadership group in this, maybe your CEO or your managing director or someone else in the organization, you also need to consider their style. So I think often, we might look to somebody like Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, who has established this great reputation for doing these really kind of seemingly off the cuff Facebook Live video updates, but that's not going to work for everyone. That's not going to work for every leader. And so you should be looking to influence your leaders on the universe of channels that are out there now and making sure that they can kind of get the most out of every touch point, but think carefully about what's a good fit. So for example, I'm not sure there's too many CEOs of ASX 200 companies that would do a great TikTok for a change comms. I mean, and that's, I'm not having a go there. I don't think I've ever made a good TikTok either. So think carefully and make sure you got that right, that you got the tone and the approach right. Okay, so thinking now about strategy and process. First piece of advice around thinking about your strategy and your process for communicating change, and I've given you a preview there of what I'm about to say, is communicate inside out. So what I mean by that is start with your internal people before going externally. Now, obviously, we are an ASX listed company, so there is certain information that we often cannot disclose until it's been communicated to the market. And there might be other announcements that you can't give people a heads up on. But if in that instance, you need to make sure that happens simultaneously. Because the worst thing you can do is to communicate a change and have a client or a customer or a member pick up the phone and call their representative from your company, and they say, I've got no idea what you're talking about. What is this, huh? It's a horrible experience for both the customer and your employee, and it does a huge amount of damage to your brand and to your credibility. The other thing that I think about when I'm working my way through a change communication strategy is that the way that communications might happen and the tailoring of that communication is something like an inverse pyramid. So starting at the top, you might have your board or your management team. They need to know pretty much everything. Then other people internally might need to know quite a bit. The client group that's impacted probably needs to know all the key facts. And then you work your way down. There might be some that just need a bit of an FYI, know that they're aware that this is happening. So you don't need to tell everyone everything. So there's a few points there around strategy and process. Finally, now I want to talk about messaging. Now, notice how I put that last. And I think that that's because one of the biggest mistakes I see is jumping into crafting these communications before going through the process that I've just talked about. And I'm going to admit I am guilty of this. I will often, someone will send me something or an email or some communication to review, and I jump in and I start editing it to make it sound better. And then I go, hang on, why are we doing this? What is this about? What's the purpose of this? So don't rush to communicate. Stop, do the work through your audience, work through your strategy, work through your purpose, and then put pen to paper or what it might be. Now, obviously that you don't necessarily want to spend weeks and weeks on that if it's something that needs to go quickly, but there's always enough time to think things through. So a few points now on messaging. Firstly, get to the point. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see around not getting to the point is excessive backstory. So wanting to tell all of the things that have led up to this moment in time, which internally might be really important to you, or you might think you need it, but people are just reading that and going, what is this? Why are you telling me all of this? Like, what is the purpose of this communication? So I've got a little analogy here I find helpful and you might find helpful to keep in mind. So let's say that your friend is just about to jump on a train and you've got something important that you need to tell her. Okay, so there she is. She's waiting for the train. It's just pulled up to the station. So you say, what you want to say to her is, I'm getting married. I'm getting married next month in Byron Bay, and I want you to be in my wedding. Great. She's got the message. She's off. She's in. But what I often see, the opposite of that, is something like this. So, I've been dating for a while, and I've been on a few different apps, and I thought I'd found the one with Jack, and that didn't really work out. And now I've met Sam, and well, we've had our ups and downs, and she's gone. That train has left the station. She's got no idea what you're talking about. You've missed it all. So keep that in mind. Get to the point. Give them an idea of what is coming up. What is the change that you're looking to communicate? Now, I think often we do a lot of that backstory or justification when it's a difficult message. And I think that it's actually even more important when it's a difficult message to get to the point up front, because sugarcoating or burying a difficult message will only make your audience angry, confused, anxious. It's not a good experience. So there is no reason to go into a long backstory or to hide your message. Get to the point. Okay, so get to the point. Make your actions really clear. So this goes a little bit to the previous point, but it's really critical that you call out what you need your audience to do. And often you don't need them to do anything. You're just telling them about it. And so in that instance, what I would always say is, you don't need to do anything. Okay, good. Phew. Right. Thanks. I know I don't need to do anything. If they do need to do something, make sure that it is really clear and it's not convoluted, and that it's not they will understand it. And I think often we can be very close to the detail, and what we think it makes perfect sense, but to the outside world, it's very confusing. A previous company that I worked at sent out a communication to some of our external customers, and thought it all sounded fine, what was being communicated, and it found its way to this customer's family member, who happened to be a radio shock jock, if you will, and they read it out on air, and it honestly made no sense at all. It was very unclear what was being asked, and this shock jock was inviting the audience, can you tell me what this says? What is this message? So that's a pretty extreme example. You don't want that to happen to you. And I think that's the simple answer to that, is to hand it to someone who hasn't been involved in the project, who has no idea of the context, and ask them if they know. Ask them if they know what's going on. Next, I would say keep it brief. As to getting to the point, don't add lots and lots of pages of detail. It's only going to kind of annoy people. Provide avenues of help and support. That's really, really key. If people don't know where to go for help and support, then they will get anxious and angry, and it might come out in other places like social media or a current affair. And finally, get real. Always sign off using a real person's name. There's nothing worse than dropping a bombshell in an email or a newsletter and not having the guts to put a real person's name to it. So, while we work for businesses and other organizations, we're just people dealing with other people. So let's be people and put a bit of a human touch to these communications. Right. So now I'm going to get practical and share some things that worked well for us at Iress. So firstly, we had a really clear narrative and goal, and that went over the last year, and that helped inform everything that we do. And that was that we were going to prioritize our people's health and well-being and provide uninterrupted service to our clients and users. So we established that really early on, and that helped to inform everything that we did, every touch point, everything to our clients, everything to our customers, everything to our investors. And once you have that really clear, you can actually use that then to sense check against what you're doing. And you can use that to, really challenge why we're doing this. Does it line up with that clear goal? So that is a really key step, and that worked really well for us. We increased the tempo of our internal comms. I know this is a session about external change comms, but internal comms is so important. And if your own people don't know what's going on, then they will not be able to support you in communicating that change. So I think that that's often a place that gets missed. So do not, as I said earlier, inside out, do not underestimate the power of making sure your people are well drilled in what's going on. We had very clear avenues of support, both internally through things like Slack and our intranet, and externally we had a web page which was updated almost daily to help clients be able to do their, due diligence or know where they could get help or what was changing. And then finally, we had a principle of wanting to do the right thing by our customers. And so what that looked like for us was we deferred fee rises and highlighted some free features within our software that could help them to adapt to digital ways of working. But we also created this repository of information to help them adapt to this remote way of working. And that was extremely well received, both by our customers, but also by, we got a lot of media coverage out of that because we were being helpful. We were showing how we could actually help people at this critical time. Okay, so that's what worked well for us. How about now some examples of where I think companies may have got it a bit wrong? So overuse of some key terms. Raise your hand if you've used any of these. I can't see you raise your hands, but I'm assuming you're raising your hand over the past year. Guilty. I think the one that for us was we realized we needed to stop using was unprecedented, unprecedented times. It's hard because, we're all trying to wrap our heads around this moment, but it's really, when you see that on this chart, you realize you're not being original. And it's kind of, then it starts to look like a cliche. It starts to look quite insincere. So you want to avoid cliches. You want to be human. You want to be real. So this might be a good one to keep in your back pocket and tick off and cross out if you ever see anyone in your business or you get tempted to use any of these terms, because I think they've been used enough. This is a good one, overly familiar comms. So how many of you received a whole bunch of emails from suppliers, partners, things that you didn't even realize you'd signed up to? And I love this tweet, which really summarizes it. Gosh, there was a certain period where they were coming in several times a day. And I think, for example, a gym that you might have joined 10 years ago saying, just checking in, just want to make sure you're okay. That's quite annoying, actually. Like, why are you contacting me? Why are you and everyone else saying that? But on the flip side, if you go back to that principle of being helpful, doing the right thing, if that gym had sent an email saying, hey, no, we haven't spoken for a while, but we thought you could do with some home workout videos. Or how would you like some nutrition advice on how to, lose those COVID kgs? That might actually make me reassess my relationship with that gym and go, that's actually really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. And then finally, I think the big mistake that some brands made was to just look really out of touch. And a few examples I thought of here were, first one, Wetherspoons in the UK. They're a big pub brand. Their owner or founder, this very wealthy gentleman, decided he wasn't going to pay his staff till the government first paid him, and had a big stoush with the government over that, which looked terrible for his employees and his customers. And he backtracked on that pretty quickly. So that was just looking like very tone deaf in the environment. Even though there may have been good reasons for that, it wasn't the right way to announce that. Jerry Harvey, a bit of an own goal there from Jerry when he went out on 60 Minutes and declared that the pandemic was great for his business. Again, that looked really awful when there were lots of people losing their jobs and a lot of fear and anxiety in the community. So not a great one there. I think he later admitted that he regretted that. And then Lorna Jane announcing that they had some tights that could fight coronavirus. Yeah, you can't do that. Unsubstantiated claims. It just looked really like they were cashing in on what was a really serious and significant moment. So not a great move there. Okay, so I'm coming up to time now, and I'm hoping to leave some time for questions, but just wanted to finish with my last 3 points. Just if you only take 3 things away from this would be it. So firstly, take the time to get it right. Now, obviously, you don't want to be tardy. You don't want to be looking like you've got no idea and you haven't actually been forthcoming in communicating. But you need to stop. You need to breathe. You need to think things through. Otherwise, you can run into that situation where what you send out actually makes things a hell of a lot worse. So the other point I wanted to make around this is I think that we as comms people, I kind of think of us as like the Department of Common Sense. So you shouldn't feel that your job is simply to polish a bad message. It's actually, you have the right to push back on the business and say, this doesn't feel right. Why are we doing this? Is there another way that we could achieve this? So, again, I think don't just rush to communicate. Interrogate whether or not it's actually the right move in the first place. Secondly, always communicate inside out. Obviously, I have internal comms as part of my remit, but I'm very passionate about it because your people are your greatest army and greatest advocate for helping you drive change. So do not underestimate the power of making sure they feel part of that and that they know what to say and they can help you on that journey. And then finally, I'm very big on this, so I'm going to say it again. Get to the point. We're all really time poor. We have very full inboxes, very full Teams and Slack chat boxes, whatever you want to call it. So you don't waste your audience time with lots of justification or backstory. Just get to the point. As I said earlier, if it's a tough message, that's actually the time to shine, is to be upfront and tell them what it is and help them by being clear and calm and rational and guide them through that emotional journey. Because we play such an important role here, and we actually can make such a difference to the lives of our people, both internally and externally. So, I think that by getting to the point and by being that voice of reason, being clear and calm and rational, we can actually really help them to navigate and accept the change. So I think that's about all I've got. I'm going to stop share now and see what questions you might have.
Very insightful, Kelly. Thank you so much for that. Again, if there's any questions people would like to add, we still have some time available. I just did want to touch on a few things, Kelly. So in regards to, I know we touched on language and being fairly direct and having some sort of consistency in your messaging. How do you actually align your communication strategy? And is there a specific platform that's worked well for you?
Align in terms of sharing.
It's just a message, whether it's being internal and external.
Yeah, okay. So I guess it does come down to thinking about all those channels. For us at Iress, we use Slack internally, and that is our go-to place for people to coordinate all of that thinking. And I know that a lot of businesses are using Teams as well. And I think that if you have a big change agenda going on, creating that clear community internally of where all that information is going to be kept is really key. So that even if somebody who you might miss someone in your company, for example, who you think, oh, they don't need to know about this, they don't have much to do with it, but then they might still get the call. They might have a rep or someone at a barbecue or someone ask them about it. So if we can make it really clear, and the way we do it at Iress is that we have dedicated channels for every client, every initiative, and on the most part, these are open within the company. So anyone can jump in and go, I've heard about this thing that we're doing. I'll just jump in and have a look. Okay, yep, that's how I'm on the same page. So okay. I think that transparency as much as possible is really critical there, so that people can get all the info they need.
Yeah, brilliant. And in terms of being direct, and I know that we touched on that and being time poor, how direct is direct? You don't want to be over direct.
Oh, that's very true. I think when I say direct, I guess I don't mean being abrupt, because that's also going to be, if you think about that that emotional trigger, that will feel quite a shock to have someone send you a very terse message, right? This is what's happening, deal with it. You want to still be sensitive. I think it is definitely a balance. But what I often see is that in the people being concerned about potentially upsetting a customer or a member or somebody, that they kind of shy away from actually just saying what's going on, and in doing that they make it much more confusing and difficult to navigate. So yes, totally agree. I don't think you want to be like, this is what it is, deal with it. You've got to be sensitive and understand your audience, but at the same time, I think just kind of lay it out in as simple terms as you can. I think simplicity is different to being overly direct.
Yeah, and having that emotional intelligence as well.
Yeah.
With your market and your audience. We do have a question that's just come in. Did you encounter any internal resistance to your approach or strategy? Did you find you had to do a lot of educating internally for your stakeholders about the value of a well thought out comms approach? That's by Mandy.
Oh, that's a great question there. No, I don't think we had any internal resistance. I mean, there was, as many of you would know, with this particular example, the whole world was going through this, and you know, you needed people to take charge and start to put some order around what the response was going to be. I think that probably the biggest thing that I saw internally was just a bit of, you know, similarly to externally, was a bit of anxiety around wanting to know what our position was. And interestingly, what we found was that people just wanted somebody to step up and say, this is what's happening. Offices are closed, you're working from home. Customers can no longer come into the office. You know, we won't, but because we reinforced that clear narrative around maintaining uninterrupted service to clients and users and protecting our people's health and well-being, any decision that we made, people were like, that sounds fine. I understand. Thank you. So, yeah, so I think that in a crisis, people are looking to you to just make a decision and to be clear and rational and calm and have all the facts. In terms of educating our internal stakeholders, again, I think we just try to bring them with us. And so what was, as I spoke about, upping the tempo of those leader sessions. And what we like to do is kind of step them through our thought process and say, you know, we've said, and our CEO said, look, we don't have all the facts, and this situation is changing fast. But as it stands, this is what we're thinking, and this is what we're going to be doing. And that really landed well with people.
Awesome. So there's a couple more minutes left. There's about 3 minutes. I do want to, okay, so there's another question that's come in. We'll see if we can wrap this up really quickly. So how can this be applied to doing community consultation? Do you just tell residents what you need to do in their area and why? Marty can start.
Yeah, so community consultation, I will admit I haven't had in my career, I haven't had much exposure to that, but I think the principles are still pretty sound, and I think that you will obviously have a much more direct, you'll need to go much more direct, you know, so for example, if you're dealing with building a motorway or something and you need to inform residents, I think that letter, you often see this, that they'll get that letter, and that's when anxiety starts bubbling up. But if you can create those opportunities to go and meet people, to talk it through with them, and I think that the key there is just to be continually seen to be present, not just dropping it on them and walking away, but to face into it and say, this is what's happening. We're here to support you. We want to hear your concerns. We want to help you as much as we can. I think that it's the principles are the same. It's just that in often with community consultation, I think, whereas in a B2B technology sense, you might be doing that virtually, you're probably going to have to hit the ground and go on have lots of face-to-face opportunities to guide people through that change journey.
Brilliant. All right, so that's all the time we have for questions. If there are any more questions, feel free to submit them, and I'll pass them on to Kelly directly, and she'll answer them in her own time. Otherwise, Kelly, thank you so much for your time, and fantastic presentation, very engaging, and yeah, thank you to everybody who submitted the questions.